Russia's invasion of Ukraine was one of the biggest events of the last few years. Despite the ongoing tragedy, media coverage of the war over the past months has waned. Since February of 2022, over 350,000 lives have been lost, including soldiers and innocent civilians. That's like an entire mid-sized city just gone. And it doesn't stop there. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Think about this. Over 8 million refugees are now spread across Europe, making it the largest displacement crisis since World War II in Europe. And the impact on Ukraine itself? Devastating. Its economy shrank by 29% in 2022. Imagine losing nearly a third of your country's economic output in a single year. Farmlands that once fed the world have been destroyed. Cities that were full of people are now rubble. Ukraine, one of the world's largest exporters of grain, is struggling just to survive with financial and military aid from the West. But the war's ripple effects haven't been limited to Ukraine. Europe has felt this too. For decades, Russia was Europe's main supplier of oil and gas. When the war began, those ties were cut. What happened next? Energy prices went through the roof. People across the continent suddenly found themselves paying double or even triple to heat their homes. Inflation soared. Businesses faced closures, and governments scrambled to find new energy suppliers. And that's where it gets interesting. Because while Europe struggled to adapt, one country quietly stepped up and started thriving, of which the entire media is silent about. And that's Norway. Now, Norway wasn't on anyone's radar as a big winner in this conflict. It's a small country with just over 5 million people, mostly known for its stunning fjords, great skiing, and, well, not much else, right? But thanks to its oil and gas reserves, Norway suddenly became Europe's hero. While Russian energy got the boot, Norway's pipelines started a-pumping, and the money flowed all across from the Western Hemisphere. And how much money are we talking about exactly? Norway's government has reported hundreds of billions in extra revenue since the war started. That's almost a quarter of its annual economic output, an insane boost for a country that already had one of the strongest economies in the world. Europe's energy crisis turned Norway into the continent's energy MVP. Before the war, Russia supplied nearly half of Europe's natural gas. But when sanctions hit, Russia was out and Norway stepped up big time. It's now Europe's largest supplier, covering over 30% of Europe's gas demand, while also pumping out oil at record levels. Norwegian companies are exporting 2 million barrels of oil daily, and natural gas exports hit an all-time high of 122 billion cubic meters last year. All this energy revenue is basically printing money for Norway, and it's not just oil and gas. Norway's crushing it in other areas too. The country's seafood industry, for example, cashed in on the sanctions that wiped out Russian exports. Norwegian salmon, crab, and other seafood products have become global favorites, raking in record-high sales as the war left a huge gap in the global market. Norway, with its pristine waters and sustainable fishing practices, swooped in to dominate the crab game. But this sudden success hasn't come without controversy. Norway, a country often celebrated as a model of peace and sustainability, is now being called a war profiteer. Many Western nations argue it's made billions while donating just a fraction of that to Ukraine. It's a tough spot to be in for Norway, as they found an economic opportunity while supporting Ukraine together with the West. So in this video, we'll discuss how Norway went from being a quiet Nordic nation to a key player in the global economy, all thanks to one of the darkest chapters in the 21st century. We'll break down the numbers, explore the ethics, and ask the big question. Is Norway thriving, or are they just lucky at the right time? But before we jump in, please be sure to hit that like button down below. It helps us out tremendously. We appreciate you. Let's start with a little background. With the ongoing war, Norway is becoming really rich, and not just with seafood, but specifically crabs. However, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Norway's crab industry was already a significant player in the global seafood market, though it operated in the shadow of Russia's dominance. Norway's crab exports primarily consisted of red king crab and snow crab, harvested from the cold, pristine waters of the Barents Sea and the North Atlantic. The red king crab, originally introduced to the Barents Sea by Soviet scientists in the 1960s, has become a lucrative fishery for Norway, despite its invasive nature. By 2021, Norway was exporting approximately 10,000 tons of king crab annually, with key markets in Europe, Asia, and North America. On the other hand, Russia's crab industry was far larger, with exports valued at over $1 billion annually. Russia supplied a significant portion of the world's king crab, particularly to the United States and Asia. Norway's crab industry, while profitable, was not the dominant force it is today. The industry was characterized by steady growth with a focus on sustainability and high-quality, expensive products. Norwegian authorities set strict quotas to ensure the long-term viability of crab populations, and the country's reputation for sustainable fishing practices helped it maintain a strong position in premium markets. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, Western nations imposed sweeping sanctions on Russian exports, including seafood. The United States, a major importer of Russian king crab, implemented a complete ban on Russian seafood imports, cutting off a market worth over $1 billion annually. This decision created a significant supply gap in the global crab market, particularly for king crab, which is highly prized in luxury seafood markets. The sanctions disrupted long-standing supply chains and left buyers scrambling for alternative sources. Norway, with its established crab industry and reputation for quality, was uniquely positioned to fill this void. The Norwegian government acted swiftly and capitalized on the opportunity, increasing crab quotas and investing in infrastructure to meet the surging global demand. In late 2024, the Norwegian Ministry of Trade, Industry and Fisheries announced a significant increase in the king crab quota for 2025, raising it to 12,725 tons, a 2,425-ton increase from the previous year. This decision was driven by the need to meet global demand while maintaining sustainable harvesting practices. The government also heavily invested in modernizing fishery fleets and building state-of-the-art processing facilities, in particular in northern Norway, where much of the king crab fishing is concentrated. These investments paid off handsomely. In 2024, Norway exported 2,500 tons of king crab, worth 1.2 billion Norwegian krona. That's about $100 million. Marking a 43% increase in value and a 78% rise in volume compared to 2023. The United States emerged as the largest market for Norwegian king crab, with exports worth 414 million krona in 2024, an 8-fold increase from just 2 years earlier. The surge was not only fueled by the redirection of demand from Russian suppliers to Norwegian ones, but also improved logistics and a rebound in Asian restaurant markets post-pandemic. Norway's crab exports are now a cornerstone of its seafood industry, with significant inroads in Europe and North America. The United States has become Norway's biggest customer for king crab, importing 414 million krona worth in 2024 alone. This growth has been increasing and is not expected to stop, and that can be seen elsewhere in the world as well. Asia has proven to be a major growth market for Norwegian crabs, in particular in countries like China, Vietnam, and Hong Kong. China's growing middle class, with its increasing appetite for luxury seafood, has been a key driver for demand. In 2024, Norway exported more than 500 tons of king crab to Asia, accounting for about 25% of the country's total king crab exports. This growth has been facilitated by strong trade relationships with Norway and the East, and of course Norway's reputation for delivering premium quality crab. The surge in crab exports has contributed to record-breaking revenue for Norway's seafood industry as a whole. So, to clarify this bigger picture with numbers, in 2024, total seafood exports had an all-time high of 151.4 billion Norwegian krona. It's about 12.8 billion euro, representing an 18% increase from 2023. While salmon remains the backbone of Norway's seafood exports, king crab has emerged as an in-demand seafood alongside cod and herring. But it wasn't always this way. Just a few decades ago, the red king crab was an unwelcome guest in Norwegian waters. Introduced to the Barents Sea, as we discussed before, by Soviet scientists in the 1960s, the crab was initially seen as an invasive species with little economic value. But now it has transformed rural coastline communities and injected new life into struggling economies. You see, in the early days, the king crab was more of a nuisance than a resource. It preyed on native species like starfish, sea urchins, and mollusks, disrupting the delicate balance of the marine ecosystem. Fishermen viewed it as a pest, and there was little demand for it in global markets. But over time, attitudes began to shift. By the 1990s, Norway started to see the potential in this invasive species. The government and private sector began investing in infrastructure, upgrading fishing fleets and building state-of-the-art processing facilities. These investments paid off, and by the 2020s, Norwegian king crab had become a premium product, sought after by high-end restaurants and seafood markets around the world. The economic impact has been profound, especially in northern Norway, where much of the king crab fishing is concentrated. Towns like Finnmark, once on the brink of decline, have been revitalized by the industry. Small-scale fishermen who once struggled to make ends meet are now earning a decent living hauling in king crab. Processing plants have sprung up along the coast, creating jobs in everything from crab cleaning to logistics. Women, in particular, have benefited, making up a significant portion of the workforce in these facilities. To your surprise, the story of Norway's crab industry isn't all success and prosperity. The rapid expansion has come with significant environmental costs. The red king crab is, after all, an invasive species, and its voracious appetite has taken a toll on native marine life. Starfish, sea urchins, and mollusks, species that play crucial roles in maintaining the ecosystem, have seen their populations decline. In 2023, the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research, the IMR, sounded the alarm, reporting a significant drop in the king crab population in the Barents Sea. Their recommendation? A 60% reduction in the 2024 quota, down to just 966 tons. For an industry that has been riding high, this was a stark reminder of the delicate balance between economic growth and environmental sustainability. Norway has responded to these challenges with a mix of science and policy. Annual quotas are now set based on rigorous scientific assessments, ensuring that harvesting stays within sustainable limits. The increase in the king crab quota is a goal to strike a balance, keeping the industry alive while giving the ecosystem a chance to recover. And it's also more than just about quotas. Norway is also investing in research to better understand the king crab's impact on the marine environment. Scientists are studying everything from its reproductive habits to its interactions with native species, while fishermen are encouraged to report data on their catches to help monitor crab populations. The question is, can Norway maintain this balance? Too much fishing and the ecosystem could collapse. Too little and the economic gains could vanish. It's a complicated situation. The red king crab has brought prosperity to Norway's coastal communities, but it's also a reminder that every boom comes with risks. So to solve this new problem, Norway hasn't been tackling the sustainability challenge of king crab harvesting alone. The country has actively sought collaboration with other nations, in particular the US and Canada, where king crab is also a major fishery. Norwegian researchers and policymakers have been sharing best practices and working on coordinated management strategies with their international counterparts. This kind of global cooperation is needed for ensuring the long-term health of crab populations and the marine ecosystems they depend on. By pooling knowledge and resources, countries can develop more effective management plans to ensure the crab industry remains sustainable for everyone involved. And with Norway's case, this is more important than ever. The king crab boom is just one piece of Norway's larger economic success story. Already Europe's top natural gas supplier and a global seafood powerhouse, Norway has consistently used its natural resources to maintain its status as one of the wealthiest nations in the world per capita. In 2024, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the largest in the world, reached a staggering $1.4 trillion in value. This financial cushion gives the country a significant advantage in tackling economic challenges and capitalizing on new opportunities. And that gave room for Norway's investments in infrastructure. On top of that, Norway's ability to quickly fill the supply gap left by the Russian sanctions have paid off big time, while Europe was still heavily relying on Russian gas. But how did Europe give away its energy dependency to Russia? Well, it all started after World War II, when Europe was picking up the pieces of its shattered industries and economies. Russia, sitting on massive reserves of natural gas, oil, and coal, saw an opportunity and stepped in as a key supplier, offering energy at prices Europe just couldn't say no to. Over time, this relationship grew deeper, especially after the Cold War, as Europe's energy demands shot up alongside its booming economies. By the early 2000s, Russia had pretty much become Europe's main energy source, supplying a huge chunk of its natural gas, oil, and coal. Fast forward to 2019, and Russian energy was making up 41.1% of the EU's natural gas imports, 36.5% of its crude oil imports, and about 24.4% of its total energy consumption. But here's the thing. This dependency wasn't spread evenly across Europe. Countries like Germany, Italy, and a bunch of Eastern European nations were way more hooked on Russian energy than others. Germany, though, really took the cake when it came to dependency. A big part of this was its decision to phase out nuclear power after the Fukushima disaster in 2011. The move, part of Germany's Energiewende, or energy transition, was supposed to push the country towards renewable energy. But shutting down nuclear plants left a massive energy gap, and natural gas became the quick fix. It was cleaner than coal and more flexible than nuclear, making it the perfect transition fuel. The problem? Germany turned to Russia to meet its growing gas needs. And this reliance only got worse with major pipeline projects like Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Now, Nord Stream 1, up and running since 2011, pumped up to 55 billion cubic meters, BCMs, of gas annually, from Russia to Germany, bypassing traditional transit countries like Ukraine and Poland. Nord Stream 2, its twin pipeline, was supposed to double that capacity, but caught up in geopolitical drama and environmental protests. People argued these pipelines didn't just deepen Europe's energy dependence on Russia, they also undercut efforts to diversify energy sources and boost energy security. Even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, cracks were starting to show in Europe's energy strategy. The global energy market was already under pressure, with surging demand, supply chains strained, and the COVID-19 pandemic wreaking havoc on economies. By late 2021, European natural gas prices were through the roof, hitting record highs of over €100 per megawatt hour at the Tidal Transfer Facility, the TTF, in the Netherlands. This price spike exposed just how vulnerable Europe's energy system was, especially its heavy reliance on Russian gas. In 2021, Russia supplied 155 BCM of natural gas to the EU, making up around 40% of Europe's total gas imports. Countries like Germany, Italy, and much of Eastern Europe depended on Russian gas for everything, from heating homes to powering industries. This dependency gave Russia serious geopolitical leverage. For example, Russia had previously cut off gas supplies to Ukraine during pricing disputes, which indirectly affected gas flows to Europe. And with the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine only added to the growing anxiety over Europe's energy security. But despite these glaring red flags, Europe's effort to diversify its energy sources moved at a snail's pace. Russian gas and oil kept dominating the energy mix, leaving Europe wide open to political and economic risks. And while Europe talked a big game about energy diversification, progress was painfully slow. Renewable energy projects kept getting bogged down by bureaucracy and funding challenges. By the time Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Europe's energy dependency had become a glaring vulnerability. The war forced Europe to confront the risks of its energy strategy head-on, sparking a mad scramble to find alternative energy sources and speed up the transition to renewables. But untangling decades of reliance on Russian energy? That wasn't going to be easy, or cheap. After the invasion, Europe's reliance on Russian energy became more and more untenable. Sanctions on Russian exports and retaliatory measures by Moscow followed. Russian gas flows to Europe plummeted as pipelines like Nord Stream 1 were shut down or operated at reduced capacity. By mid-2022, Gazprom had slashed gas supplies to Europe by nearly 80%, blaming technical and political reasons. This left European nations scrambling to find alternative energy sources to meet their winter heating and electricity needs. The energy crisis sent gas and electricity prices skyrocketing across Europe, with natural gas prices at the TTF hub hitting an eye-watering €345 per megawatt hour in August of 2022, nearly 10 times the pre-crisis level. Governments rolled out emergency measures to shield consumers from soaring energy bills like price caps, subsidies, and even energy rationing. The crisis laid bare the fragility of Europe's energy infrastructure and hammered home the urgent need for energy diversification. In response, the EU launched a series of initiatives aimed at cutting its dependency on Russian energy and speeding up the shift to alternative sources. The European Commission introduced the REPowerEU plan, which aimed to slash Russian gas imports by 2/3 by the end of 2022. This ambitious plan involved ramping up imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG, from countries like the United States and Qatar, as well as boosting renewable energy production. The EU also fast-tracked investments in energy infrastructure, including LNG terminals, pipeline interconnections, and storage facilities. Germany, for instance, rushed to build floating LNG terminals to receive gas from global markets. By the end of 2022, Europe's LNG imports had surged by over 60%, helping to offset the drop in Russian pipeline gas. On top of that, the EU doubled down on expanding renewable energy capacity, with a focus on wind, solar, and hydrogen technologies. These measures weren't just about reducing reliance on Russian energy. They also aligned with Europe's broader climate goals under the European Green Deal. Now, then what's the deal with Norway? While a significant energy supplier to Europe, its role in global energy markets has always been more limited compared to Russia. Before the conflict, Norway supplied around 20% of the EU's natural gas and 8.7% of its crude oil, making it a key but secondary player in the European energy market. Norwegian natural gas was delivered to Europe via undersea pipelines from the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea, providing a reliable and stable source of energy for countries like the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands. But here's the thing. Norway's production capacity was much smaller than Russia's, and its energy exports were mostly focused on Europe, so its global market influence was limited. Norway's oil production, which peaked at 3.4 million barrels per day in 2001, had dropped to around 2 million barrels per day by 2023, accounting for roughly 2% of global oil consumption. Still, Norway's role as a stable and reliable energy supplier became increasingly important during the 2022 crisis, as Europe scrambled to diversify its energy sources and cut ties with Russian imports. Plus, Norway's energy policy, which emphasized sustainability and renewable energy development, aligned more with Europe's agenda to transition to a greener energy future. And as of right now, in 2025, Norway's energy sector is absolutely crushing it. The country's net cash flow from oil and gas, a jaw-dropping 680 billion Norwegian krona. It's about 65 billion USD, by the way. To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of some small countries. So how did Norway pull this off? 2 words: production and prices. They ramped up production from massive offshore fields like Johan Sverdrup, which alone pumps out over 700,000 barrels of oil a day. And natural gas? Norway shipped a record-breaking 122 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe in 2023, enough to heat millions of homes and keep the factories running. Oh, and let's not forget the global energy prices, which were through the roof thanks to the war and the supply chain chaos. Norway was in the right place at the right time, and they played their cards perfectly. But here's the kicker. Norway didn't just sit back and count the cash. They had a plan, a big one. Namely the Government Pension Fund Global, better known as the Oil Fund. This thing is like Norway's financial safety net on steroids. Established back in the 1990s, the fund was designed to do one thing: save Norway's oil and gas wealth for future generations. And it delivered. By November of 2024, the fund's value had skyrocketed to 19 trillion Norwegian krona. To give an idea of how massive this is, it's roughly 340,000 for every single Norwegian citizen. But the oil fund isn't just sitting in a bank collecting dust. No, it's invested in nearly 9,000 companies worldwide. Tech giants like Apple and Microsoft, real estate projects in New York and Tokyo, you name it. In the first half of 2024 alone, the fund grew by 1.475 trillion Norwegian krone, about $138 billion, thanks to some seriously savvy investments in technology stocks. As one Norwegian economist put it, the oil fund isn't just a piggy bank, it's a global financial powerhouse. So what does all this mean? The oil fund acts like a financial cushion, letting the government ride out economic storms without even breaking a sweat. When the energy prices drop, and they always do, Norway can dip into the fund to cover public expenses. In 2025, the government plans to withdraw 460.1 billion krona, about $43.1 billion, from the fund to support public services and infrastructure projects. That's up from 416.5 billion krona in 2024, but still well within the country's self-imposed spending limit of 3% of the fund's total value. This disciplined approach to fiscal policy is what sets Norway apart. While other resource-rich nations have squandered their wealth, Norway has built a system that ensures its prosperity for generations to come. As one government official quipped, "We're not just thinking about the next election, we're thinking about the next century." But let's rewind a bit. Before the whole Russian-Ukraine mess, Norway was already a solid energy partner for Europe, supplying about 20% of the EU's natural gas. Not too shabby, right? But compared to Russia's 40%, it was kinda like being the opening act for the main headliner. Fast forward to the war, and suddenly Russia's gas flows to Europe take a nosedive, like an 80% drop. Suddenly, Norway isn't just the opening act anymore, it's the star of the show. Norway didn't waste a second. It cranked up its natural gas production, tapping into those massive reserves in the North Sea and the Norwegian Sea. By 2023, Norway's gas exports to Europe hit a whopping 122 BCM, covering over 25% of the EU's total gas needs. That's a huge jump from pre-war levels, and it didn't happen by magic. Norway pushed its production to the absolute limit. Take the Ormen Lange gas field, for example. This thing is one of Norway's biggest and baddest. Even before the crisis, Norway had been pouring money into advanced offshore drilling tech, and when the pressure was on, those investments paid off big time. By 2023, Ormen Lange was pumping gas at near max capacity, helping Norway hit that record-breaking 122 BCM output. But it wasn't just about squeezing more out of what they already had. Norway also has new fields online, like Aasta Hansteen, which became a key player in the country's energy surge. By mid-2024, Norway was on track to hit 117 BCM in piped gas exports, matching its all-time high. Not too shabby for a country that had to adapt and scale up under intense pressure. But here's the thing. Producing all that gas was only half the battle. Getting it to Europe? That required a massive overhaul of Norway's energy infrastructure. And this is where things get really interesting. Norway didn't just ramp up production, it transformed its entire energy export system and infrastructure. We're talking billions invested in new liquefied natural gas facilities and expanding pipeline networks. LNG, especially, became a game changer. Unlike piped gas, which is stuck to specific routes, LNG can be shipped anywhere. That made it a crucial tool for diversifying supply routes and keeping Europe's energy market stable. Take the Nyhamna gas processing plant, for instance. This place was already a big deal in Norway's energy setup, but in 2023, it got a major upgrade, boosting its capacity to process over 20 million tons of LNG annually. And guess where most of that went? Yeah, Europe. Over 80% of it. That kind of move helped keep the continent's energy market from going off the rails during some seriously shaky times. But Norway didn't stop there. It also beefed up its pipeline game, building new connections to make sure gas could flow straight to the EU. One standout project was the expansion of the Polar-led pipeline, which upped the delivery volumes of natural gas to Europe. Norway also teamed up with big European countries like Italy, Germany, and the UK to create more stable gas flows, ensuring there were multiple routes to get gas where it needed to go. For example, in July of 2024, Norwegian energy company Vår Energi extended a natural gas supply contract with Italy's Eni by 12 years, committing to deliver 5 BCM of natural gas annually from 2024 to 2036, with laying new pipelines. And another example is the Baltic Pipe, connecting Norway's North Sea gas field to Poland, replacing the 10 BCM of gas that Poland had previously imported from Russia. This wasn't just about infrastructure, though. It was about building trust with European nations. Europe didn't just need gas, it needed to know its energy supply was secure. And Norway delivered on that front, big time. By 2024, Norway had firmly established itself as Europe's energy backbone, supplying up to 30% of the EU's natural gas imports and playing a pivotal role in stabilizing the continent's energy market. But this demand in Norway's providence of energy doesn't only exist within Europe's borders. It's international. When the demand for LNG shot up worldwide, Norway saw it as a chance and went all in on, for example, Asia, where countries like Japan and South Korea were scrambling to figure out their energy situation. In 2024, Norway's overseas LNG exports hit a record 10 million tons a year, with a huge chunk of that heading straight to Asian markets. This wasn't just a win for Norway's economy, it was a smart play that helped keep the global energy supply in check as Europe and Asia were basically competing for the same resources. To keep up with this growth, Norway pumped money into new LNG terminals and boosted its total export capacity by 50%, solidifying its spot as a major player in the global energy game. By 2024, Norway had pretty much become Europe's energy lifeline and a key player of energy to Asian countries, supplying up to 30% of the EU's natural gas imports and playing a key role in keeping the continent's energy market stable. Norway's quick expansion of energy exports, its push to develop LNG facilities, and its strategic partnerships with European countries didn't just fill the void left by Russia. Norway became big and important. They've been ramping up their energy exports, building out LNG facilities, and striking deals with European nations left and right. But it's more than just about stepping in to fill the void Russia left behind. Norway wants a more secure and forward-thinking energy future. And also, according to Norwegian officials, Norway isn't just riding the oil and gas wave for quick cash. The country has been a trailblazer in carbon capture and storage, CCS tech, with projects like Northern Lights Initiative aiming to slash greenhouse gas emissions from heavy industries. On top of that, they're throwing serious money into renewables, from wind farms out in the North Sea to hydropower projects tucked away in the mountains. And sure, focusing on both fossil fuels and renewables might seem a bit contradictory at first glance, but for Norway, it's all a part of the same master plan. As one government official put it, "We're not just an energy supplier, we're an energy innovator. Our goal is to balance economic growth with environmental responsibility, and that's exactly what we're doing." As Europe began to bounce back from the energy crisis, it became obvious that the post-war energy shift was about rethinking and reshaping how Europe produces and imports gas. Norway's role in this transformation was massive, but let's be real, it was only the beginning. Because beyond energy and durability, Norway made significant contributions to Ukraine's defense, especially when it comes to Ukraine's naval defense, while Norway was busy securing Europe's energy future. In 2024, Norway pledged a hefty $242 million to aid Ukraine's naval forces, in particular in the Black Sea, where Russian dominance has been threatening crucial maritime routes. Additionally, Norway's support goes on to military and humanitarian components that aim to assist Ukraine on the battlefield and in its efforts to rebuild its devastated infrastructure. One of the most notable developments came in August 2024, when Norway authorized the production of Norwegian-developed artillery ammunition within Ukraine itself. This move enables Ukrainian forces to produce 155mm artillery shells under license, addressing one of the most urgent needs for ammunition on the front lines. In a statement, Norway's defense minister explained, "This is a critical capability that will help the Ukrainian forces fight back effectively." This deal is expected to produce thousands of rounds of artillery, with Norway's Ministry of Defense estimating that the collaboration could produce up to 200,000 shells in the coming years. This commitment is expected to relieve some pressure on global supply chains, which has struggled to keep pace with the demands of the ongoing war. This isn't just about showing solidarity. It was about keeping one of the world's most important waterways open and free for profit. The Black Sea is a lifeline for Ukraine, allowing it to export grain, energy, and other goods to global markets. But with Russia's naval blockades and missile attacks on Ukrainian ports, that route's become a dangerous gamble. Norway's aid aimed to turn the tide. The $242 million package included some serious firepower, anti-ship missile systems, naval radar, patrol boats, and training for Ukrainian sailors and officers. As the Norwegian defense minister put it, this contribution will play a vital role in enhancing Ukraine's ability to safeguard its maritime interests and protect vital infrastructure from Russian attacks. But Norway wasn't going it alone. Its support for Ukraine's naval defense was part of a bigger push to strengthen NATO partnerships and boost regional security. In 2024, Norway joined NATO allies like the US and the UK and Poland in joint exercises in the Baltic and Black Seas. These drills were all about countering Russian naval activities and keeping critical maritime routes secure. By teaming up with NATO, Norway solidifies its rep as a reliable and committed ally. One NATO official even noted Norway's contributions to Ukraine's defense and its active role in NATO exercises demonstrates its commitment to collective security and regional stability. As an Arctic nation with major maritime interests, Norway has a lot riding on keeping sea lanes open and secure. The Black Sea might be far away, but it's a key artery for global trade, linking Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. By helping Ukraine defend its waters, Norway was also helping ensure the freedom of navigation in these crucial routes, pushing back Russia's threats and keeping international trade flowing. With tensions on the rise, securing NATO's eastern borders has never been more critical, because, if you didn't already know, Norway shares a border with Russia. By providing advanced military gear and training, Norway's been helping Ukraine defend its territory and protect its maritime routes. This, in turn, has helped stabilize the Black Sea region, which is crucial not just for Ukraine, but for Europe and the wider world. Besides, Norway's also been pulling its weight in NATO, participating in high-profile exercises like Operation Sea Shield in the Black Sea and Operation Cold Response in the Arctic. These drills have been all about improving interoperability among NATO allies and showing that the alliance is ready to handle anything. By showing it's committed to collective defense, Norway sent a clear message to potential adversaries. Mess with one NATO member, and you're messing with all of them. But on the flip side, lately there's been negative views on Norway's dual playing. Norway is accused of war profiting, allocating only a fraction of profits to aid Ukraine, of which the profits are made because of the war. The term war profiteering has been used to describe the way in which Norway has financially benefited from the war in Ukraine, without necessarily sharing enough of those benefits with those directly affected by the conflict. Because the surge in demand for Norwegian energy exports that we talked about earlier in this video translated into record-breaking revenue for the country. Norway, with its additional income of approximately 180 billion euro, and through its state-owned energy companies like Equinor, saw massive profits from increased exports. For example, Equinor alone posted a 275% increase in its second quarter profits in 2022, from 3.3 billion in quarter 2 of 2021 to 12.4 billion in quarter 2 of 2022. This surge in profits was driven by high oil and gas prices, with natural gas prices reaching record levels due to Europe's rush to secure energy supplies in the face of Russia's reduced exports. In contrast to that, Norway has pledged around 1.27 billion euro in aid to Ukraine since the war began. And while this amount is significant, critics argue that it falls short in comparison to Norway's newfound wealth. With oil and gas revenues soaring, many feel that the country, with its strong financial position, could and should do more to support Ukraine in its time of need. For instance, Sven Holtzmark, a professor at the Norwegian Defense Academy, was quoted as saying, "Norway is in an absolutely unique position, and we should be giving much, much more." Holtzmark and other critics argue that Norway, with its booming energy revenues, has the financial capacity to contribute more to Ukraine's defense and recovery efforts, especially given the current geopolitical context. The accusation is that the country has been more focused on maximizing its financial gains rather than providing a proportionate level of support to those suffering as a result of the war. Jens Stoltenberg, the former Norwegian Prime Minister and current NATO Secretary General, addressed this issue in a public speech, stating, "While it is important for Norway to maintain its fiscal discipline, there is an ethical responsibility that comes with being one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. We must recognize that our prosperity comes, in part, from the global energy crisis. This is the moment to act and invest in the collective security of Europe and the world." On the other hand, Norwegian officials, including Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, have defended the country's approach, arguing that Norway does not control energy prices. "Norway does not fix the prices," Støre remarked, referring to the broader market dynamics that have driven the surge in energy prices. While this response highlights the complexities of global energy markets, it also sidesteps the larger question of whether Norway should adjust its allocation of profits, given the extraordinary nature of its earnings due to this crisis because of the crisis itself. This sounds ironic and is in of itself very contradictory. In defense of Norway's aid contributions, Støre pointed out that the country has already played an active role in providing humanitarian aid and military assistance to Ukraine, albeit in a relatively modest level to its financial windfalls. Norway has contributed military equipment, including air defense systems and F-35 fighter jets to Poland, as well as providing financial aid and refugee support to those displaced by the conflict. And on top of that, in November of 2024, the Norwegian government unveiled a significant expansion of its Nansen support program for Ukraine, extending the commitment through 2030. The program will allocate a substantial 35 billion krona, about 3 billion euro, for 2025 alone. This allocation is divided into 22.5 billion krona for military support and 12.5 billion krona for humanitarian and civil aid, reinforcing Norway's long-term dedication to Ukraine's defense and recovery. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre emphasized the importance of sustained aid. "We want the people of Ukraine to know that Norway's support will continue." Norway's decision to extend the program is emblematic of its broader strategy to balance fiscal responsibility with its ethical obligation to support Ukraine in its fight for sovereignty. The Nonsense Support Program represents the country's largest commitment to international aid, alongside allocating additional funds to repair and invest in energy infrastructure, such as power grids and water systems. The objective is to ensure that essential services, including water, schooling, and health services, are accessible to those affected by the war. In September of 2024, Minister Ida said, "This funding makes a difference in the daily lives of Ukrainians. Rebuilding energy infrastructure and providing critical services is vital for recovery." According to Norwegian sources, Norway has already invested 1.4 billion Norwegian krone in the repair of energy facilities in Ukraine, with additional funds pledged for 2025. This funding has already contributed to providing power to thousands of households in war-torn regions, especially as the cold winter months approach. It is clear that Norway's contributions have undoubtedly made a significant difference in Ukraine's defense efforts, and the debate surrounding Norway's profits and aid contributions also raises broader ethical questions. Should a country that benefits financially from a global crisis be expected to contribute more significantly to humanitarian relief? This question becomes even more pressing when considering the role of other oil-rich nations, such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which have similarly profited from the energy crisis but have faced less public scrutiny over their aid efforts. In the case of Norway, the ethical dilemma is compounded by the fact that it has positioned itself as a global leader in climate and human rights advocacy, progressivism, and social democracy. So the ethical question of war profiteering still stands, and the conversation about the scale and depth of those contributions will likely continue for years to come.